Ambitious Co-Creators, Lilou here. I'm in Dublin today in the magnificent Ireland, and I decided to start this interview over at the Dublin Writers Museum. I'm sitting next to its curator, Robert Nicholson. Hello.
Good morning.
Thank you for welcoming us here. I just love reading, and I think literacy and authors and being here in Ireland, I think it's so important to be able to speak about it and what has been its impact on Ireland so that we can understand a little bit more the background and the country, since I'm going to interview more recent and new authors as well. I think we can go back into a little bit of the history. And so we're here in the center of Dublin. And I would love to know from you what is so unique about the Irish literature. What is so unique about it?
It's a question I've often been asked. It's very hard to give a straight answer to this. I think you've only to see the list of international names: Jonathan Swift, James Joyce, of course, William Butler Yeats, Samuel Beckett. And we have 4 Nobel Prize winners for literature in a country with only 4 or 5 million people in it. It's even that is an indication of what a high proportion of the nation are writers. Mm-hmm. I think books and literature have always been important to the Irish.
Yeah. How come? Why has it always been there? Why is Dublin one of the biggest cities for books, for authors, for stories?
It's one of those paradoxes. I mean, the very curious thing is that most of our famous authors actually left the country to do their writing. If you think there are maybe short list of 5 internationally known books by Irish writers, and these would be Gulliver's Travels by Jonathan Swift, Ulysses by James Joyce, Waiting for Godot by Samuel Beckett, The Importance of Being Earnest by Oscar Wilde, and Dracula by Bram Stoker. And in fact, only one of those was written in Dublin, and that was Gulliver's Travels.
Uh-huh. So a lot of Irish people were going to London or other cities to get their work exposed, or they just decided to leave Dublin for other reasons?
I think, well, there were always better opportunities in London, more publishers, traditionally, at least up until the modern age. And of course, everything can be done by the internet now. Yeah. But, back then, you had a lot more contact with London. And I think this is probably why Irish writers have become so international, because they actually left their own country instead of just sitting here writing for the Irish. Mm-hmm,
mm-hmm. Is it part of the Irish lifestyle? Does it goes with the drinking also to be a good writer? Is there well-known stories like that?
I'm sure there are plenty of well-known stories associating drinking with writing.
It's part of the inspiration, no?
Well, traditionally, yes. I think actually it was the ruin of many a good writer. There's a number of our great writers in the 1960s, people like Flann O'Brien and Brendan Behan, were unfortunately to be seen in the pub rather too often. And certainly poor Brendan Behan was diabetic. He should never have been drinking at all, which is... he died when he was 41, but I mean, he already had a great career behind him. Mm-hmm.
Is there how did the literature evolve through time? Because it started really from poetry, did it? And then it evolved into novels and...
Yes, I mean, if you look back to the earliest times, there was the oral storytelling tradition, and this really consisted of poets going all the way around to different centres in Ireland and repeating what were basically the same stories that everybody had heard before, but everybody was interested to hear the new way of telling it. So style became a very important thing in Irish storytelling, and eventually when it came to writing, they were always trying to stretch the boundaries a bit more and do something startling and unusual.
Mm-hmm. I guess there was the English Revolution, or how do you call it, the Glorious Revolution, is it? Did that impact as well the evolution of literature in Ireland?
It might have done. I mean, always our relationship with the British and the English has been an uneasy one, and I mean, to a certain extent, you could say that Irish writers have always been subversive in some way, and they found a very easy target in the conquerors, that they could subvert English society and English literature and the whole English establishment by writing.
Yeah. And how was the females and all that? Were they recognized? Did female authors were as heard as males?
I'm afraid they weren't. It's a question of history, really, that the ladies were never given as many opportunities. There were some who managed to break through. The Maria Edgeworth, for example, who wrote a novel in 1800, which is called Castle Rackrent, and it's actually the first of its kind. People up till then had been writing fantasies and London-based novels, and she wrote a novel about what was happening around the country, and it was a great influence. And Lady Gregory, of course, the great friend of Yeats, who was always, I think, she allowed herself to be overshadowed by him, but she did so much for other Irish writers. And then now, I think, in modern days, of course, women have much more opportunity to be heard. But it's there's a poster, for example, quite a famous, iconic poster, which shows the 12 great Irish writers, and they are all men. And
there's this male dominance in Ireland, and still a little bit.
Well, there are frequent remarks about the poster, and you have to say, well, which of those 12 men would you take out to put in which woman?
And what do people reply to that?
They don't.
Is that the Irish way of doing things?
I suppose, well, you could do an Irish woman writer's poster, but yes, historically, I suppose most of the great names have been men because they got better opportunities, and obviously over the past 100 years things have changed. And, people like Edna O'Brien, who's such a tremendous writer and is now recognised as one. And in the next room we've got a whole display about Mary Lavin, the storyteller, who was born 100 years ago. We'll need to do something to mark her centenary. But I suppose generally the men have the loudest voices.
Yeah. I love that there's a lot of objects from those authors here at the museum, and there's been a lot of donations, and families of authors have led you objects too, and there is something there that I'm touched by, that people contribute to this and want to make this place a real living museum. How is this working? How just people spontaneously come to you? This is
They do. Well, I think it's wonderful that so much of what we have has actually been given to us, and not just picked up in the marketplace. And that it's people who feel that we can actually represent their family or their friends. By having them displayed here in the museum. Quite recently, the widow of Benedict Kiley, the great Irish short story writer, came and presented portraits to us, which I'm in the process of displaying, and a wonderful old blackthorn stick, which was his constant companion. And that's the kind of thing you can't go out and buy in the auction rooms. It's great to have that personal touch. And I feel, people do feel that having their writers represented here is important. That's not just a question of us accumulating material. It's also important that we should recognise writers by having them featured in our collection.
Yeah. Why is it so important to you to have museums like these in cities?
Because if they're in the cities, more people can get to them. And just to have people come in and see these things, to find out all about Irish writers, it's better than having them tucked away in a safe or being kept in a basement.
Especially in this internet world, because everything is digital, and I feel personally that it's wonderful to be in contact with great souls, with great men and women that have changed the course of the history and have educated us around the world about a particular culture and events.
Yes, I mean, yes, as you say, you can learn a lot on the internet, but I think people really appreciate being able to come here and see the real thing, the three-dimensional object, and know that it hasn't been photoshopped or...
Yes. I know you're also you have a quite interesting background. I mean, why did you decide to become the director, the curator of this place, the Dublin Writers Museum, and also the James Joyce Tower? Is it?
It is. I suppose I don't know how much of it was my decision, but
what do you mean by that?
Right, well, it's over 30 years now since I became the curator of the James Joyce Museum in the Martello Tower in Sandy Cove, which is a very special place in world literature because it's the building where Ulysses opens. And so there's wonderful things there, and I've always loved the place. And it was run by the Dublin Tourism Organisation. And they decided that they would open a Dublin Writers Museum here in 1991, just over 20 years ago. So
happy anniversary.
Oh, thank you very much. Yes, we celebrated our birthday just a few months ago. So anyway, this is a project which had been going for some time, and they finally managed to get a suitable building, this wonderful one we're sitting in now, and also the money to get it going. And I suppose as I was already in the company, that in fact for 10 years I was already in a way the literary heritage representative in the company. So it seemed logical enough to become the curator here as well.
Does that mean sacrificing part of your life too, to be so much, to handle so much, or does that bring even more into your life and you're enjoying this?
I don't think I consider it a sacrifice. Obviously I have to spend a lot of my time reading good books.
That's wonderful. If there is something that you want to share with people watching all around the world that love reading, that love history, what would it be? You know, I think thanks to the internet, we're all connected through the web now, and we can share pretty powerful messages. We can speak our heart or say something that is important to us. If there is something that you've seen going through life that you would love to share and say, or is it a personal story or something that you have observed, what would that be?
You're putting me on the spot there.
I do. I love that. No, in a gentle way.
Yes, well, I think I'd just like people to come and see a museum for themselves. Don't just sit at home and look at it on the screen, even if that's where you're hearing about this now. Get out there and come and pick up a book, come and look at a portrait, discover the lives of the people who wrote all these things. There's wonderful stuff here.
Yes. And is the 100 years of the author of Dracula? Is it right? Death anniversary?
That's right. It's tomorrow, in fact. He died just about a week after the Titanic went down, which has rather overshadowed him. But yes, we're going to celebrate. We have already the first edition of Dracula, which is attracting a bit of attention. And we're going to be presented with a very large portrait of Bram Stoker, which we shall be displaying in the coming months. And just tomorrow we have a performer in who will be performing selections from Dracula, to which I'm sure there'll be a large audience.
Yeah. Did they really I keep on having questions, but did they have this a little bit screwed up mind to invent stories like Dracula? I mean, wow, gosh.
Well, he wasn't the only one. I mean, there's a certain sort of tradition in Irish writing which seemed to dwell on the strange and the unusual. There's a man called Charles Robert Maturin who wrote a Gothic novel called Melmoth the Wanderer. And then there was Sheridan Le Fanu, he actually wrote one of the famous vampire stories, Carmilla, which was a direct influence on Bram Stoker. So by the time that Bram came along, there was already something to work on. I suppose if you think of Oscar Wilde, who in fact was a close friend of his, who also wrote a sort of horror story, the picture of Dorian Gray, that there was a lot of creepy stuff going around.
I wonder where that comes from. Why Ireland particularly? It keeps on running through my mind. Like, where does this come from? Why Irish people have this particular mind?
Ireland seems to be very close to the spirit world. And I'm not talking about the ones you find in pubs.
Wonderful. Well, I find that very interesting. I want to thank you for taking your time to do this interview and being a little bit outside of your comfort zone.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you. Much love, my beautiful co-creators from Dublin